Thanks everyone for coming today. It's so great to have so many people here. We have alumni from across the decades, trustees, staff, faculty, students, and parents, which is always fun to kind of get all these different groups together. I'm Allison LaFleur. I'm WPI class of 2009, Environmental Policy and Development, and I'm the current chair of the Women of WPI committee. I'm a sister of Alpha Gamma Delta, and while on campus, I was part of student government, debate, and MSEP, which I think is now called the Connections Program out of the Office of Minority Programming, I think is the title. The Women of WPI provides opportunities for all WPI alumni to connect, support, and engage with one another. We have events we used to have events in person, now we do them online. And we also have active communities on Facebook, LinkedIn, and a brand new Twitter, Instagram coming soon. We maintain a lively group and foster personal and professional connections. We focus on both personal and professional growth, celebrating each other's achievements and successes while we foster future generations and provide opportunities for women and friends to share ideas and inspire one another. We bring folks together a few times a year and are trying to envision what that means going forward in a both online and in-person world someday. So I think everyone probably has seen you've all been muted for sound quality, and we are recording the event. You might want to toggle to speaker view. So at the top right corner of your monitor, you can select gallery view or speaker view. We have a chat feature, and you can submit questions there, and we'll also take live audience questions at the close of each presentation. If you want to ask your question live or over voice as opposed to typing, just let us know in the chat and we will let you know when it's your turn. And I think the host will unmute you. We'll figure out how that works. We'll see. So I'd like to introduce our first presenter. Dr. Pamela Mccauley is an internationally recognized innovator, entrepreneur, and engineering researcher in the development of mathematical models, human engineering, and engineering leadership. As an award-winning educator, she's on a mission to empower students and professionals to successfully pursue STEM educational, entrepreneurial, and career goals. An author of over 100 technical publications, she's a full professor and has taught industrial engineering at the University of Central Florida for 27 years, and previously held the position of Martin Luther King Jr., visiting associate professor of aeronautics and astronautics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In January 2018, she was selected as a program director for the National Science Foundation's I-Corp program, where she served in this role until last year. In 2019, she was named Technologist of the Year by the prestigious Women of Color magazine. And she's recently accepted a new position as Associate Dean of Academic Programs in the Wilson College of Textiles at North Carolina State University. As an award-winning educator, she is on a mission to empower women to successfully pursue STEM educational, entrepreneurial, and career goals. Dr. Mccauley resides in North Carolina with her husband, Dr. Johnny Michael. Please join me in welcoming WPI trustee, Dr. Pamela Mccauley.
You're muted, Dr. Mccauley.
And didn't we just talk about that in our practice? Well, and I was warming up, let me tell you. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Allison. It is such a joy to be here with you all this evening. And I love the concept of a fireside chat, and so impressed that you're continuing to do this, even amid these times. So I want to take a few minutes and do as I was suggested by Maureen and the team, to share a little bit about my background and why WPI means so much to me. And I'm going to try to get through this quickly because I would love to have time for some dialogue, some questions, and just to get to know you all a little better as well. So I'm going to share screen and share a few, and I promise you it won't be death by PowerPoint, but I will just get through a few of these. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so again, my name is Pamela Mccauley, and wanted to share a little bit about why I'm so glad to be with you in my history with WPI. It's interesting how you all found me. Bonnie found me, who used to work in your diversity programs, and I was invited to be a Women's History Month speaker, so it is very fitting that I'm here in Women's History Month several years later to share this time with you. And then I spoke at the Provost Lecture Series, And after that, the WPI Diversity Advocacy Board, they asked me to share in that role. And I was delighted to do so. I truly appreciate what you all are doing at WPI in so many ways, and I'll share some of that as well. And then more recently was asked to serve as a trustee to WPI. But I say more than anything, I feel like a friend to WPI because I feel like there's so much that we have in common. And when I think about why WPI matters to me, looking at your vision and how I've seen it live out in the few years, about 7 years that I've been affiliated, I see a common vision and values that I can relate to. I also see a spirit of excellence. I mean, I don't know anybody who says they want to half do anything, but a lot of people will half do things. But I see a real spirit of excellence among WPI faculty, the students, the staff, and just a real commitment among the leadership and a focus on social justice. I mean, you all are an awesome STEM institute and you are just as serious about social justice. And I love that. And I think that's been revealed over the last few months in terms of how your university responded to many of the challenges that we saw in the previous year, and a genuine emphasis on diversity and inclusion. And then of course, a strategic vision to have global impact. I've said many times that I don't think we need to approach any of the scientific problems that we're addressing without a global lens. And I see WPI is very committed to doing that. And of course, the visionary leader of your amazing president, Dr. Latson. So these are some of the reasons that WPI matters to me. Now, can I say this? A reason to love WPI. Is this an amazing quote? Social justice, using our knowledge and technologies to help solve the most challenging problems we face, especially in under-resourced communities around the globe. And we know that many times people who are not under-resourced will not have that focus on those who are. And to see that with WPI means so much to me. And I am so appreciative of this vision at your institution and Dr. King, Dean King, and how she is promoting this. So that's a little bit about how I came to be a part of the WPI family, although I'm not an alum. And so I want to share a little bit with you about who I am. So I'm an entrepreneur, obviously an educator. My heart is truly in education. I'll talk a little bit about that. But you know, you bring your whole self to work. I bring my whole self. So I'm a wife, I'm a mom, I'm a grandmom. You see, is this adorable? I was having a Zoom call with my granddaughter. Okay. You see who's the most important person in this picture. She got the biggest picture. Okay. And then from a career overview standpoint, Allison mentioned when she interviewed me some of my background. So I've had academic positions, but I've always very much enjoyed the entrepreneurial realm. So I've owned engineering businesses for over 20 years. And I found that was a wonderful way for me to take my research from the laboratory into applied setting and really do more. And it's really benefited my students, but I call it project and impact-based engineering. So it's been a real treat for me. And today, as an associate dean, one of the things I focus on, of course, when I was hired, my title was Associate Dean of Academic Programs. Well, shortly after being at the Wilson College of Textiles, I have a wonderful dean that I work with in the Wilson College, and he saw the passion that I had for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we increased my role and responsibility to not just academic programs, but also diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, student success is one of the things that I am most focused on. And so working with students, it's funny, I still after 20, I think I'm ending my 29th year in the academy this May, and will start my 30th year in the faculty realm. And I say, I still love working with students. Students are the best part of the job. And not that I don't enjoy my colleagues and have an impact in the community, but actually working with students, helping students become their best self and figure out their goals and seeing that optimism transition into a plan and a strategy. And so it's one of the greatest joys, and it continues to be, is really seeing and helping students achieve their goals. So a little bit more about me from a technical standpoint. I'm an engineer and a researcher. I still love being an industrial engineer, even after all of these years. So working for the Department of Defense, I work with the Department of State, with NASA, with the National Security Agency. So with many federal agencies, as it relates to my scientific background. NASA project that I performed about 2 years ago, maybe more than that, maybe about 4 years ago, was they came to me and asked me if I would develop a design for the Space Center, Kennedy Space Center, in the firing room because the configuration had changed, where it was no longer just government folks working there, but you had different people from private industry. And so we needed a different format. So that was very rewarding to redesign that and create a smart firing room. And then, of course, my area is ergonomics, occupational safety, biomechanics. So a few years ago in the Ebola crisis in 2016, and who knew what we were going to face in 2020, okay? But in 2016, when we had the Ebola outbreak, when I was started researching and talking to people about how we needed to work harder to keep healthcare workers safe. And people are like, well, you know, Dr. Mccauley, isn't ergonomics about keyboards and chairs? I say, yes, occupational ergonomics is about keyboards and chairs. But if people go to work and come home with Ebola, now COVID-19, that has become an occupational ergonomics issue. So I had done research in my lab evaluating personal protective equipment as it relates to the tasks being performed, and very rewarding. And I mentioned to you several of the entrepreneurial endeavors that I've been involved in. And so I've created technical projects and worked with many of the federal agencies. And again, it's been so rewarding to do that. One of the products that our company developed is SimSeries, and it was a suite of simulation tools to support the Army Corps of Engineers as they help communities to prepare for natural disasters. And then QCDR, seems like being in Florida, I had a lot of relationship to natural disasters, but QCDR was a project that we actually worked on after hurricanes, it's been quite a while ago, after hurricanes in Louisiana, and actually streamlined the process for data collection and management from a FEMA standpoint. And some of the educational outcomes. This slide I'm very proud of. And the number has actually increased since I did this, gave this presentation. I have graduated 20 PhD students. Over 50% have been female, okay? And over 40, I think it's 40% have been underrepresented minority students. And so this is why I say presence matters. So for us as women to be here and underrepresented minorities, it matters if we are there. We can have a greater impact than we probably understand. And of course, that trend continues with my master's students, and many of my students have won awards and successful and been successful at the national level. So again, back to teaching and the academic environment, the academy, and why it's so important to me. I have spent a lot of time doing research as it relates to real life issues. One of the areas I studied was the body-worn cameras for law enforcement officers and looking at the biomechanics and the ergonomics of that. So I like to feel like the work that I've done really is impact-based. I also can't help but be passionate about having more women in STEM. So I like to consider myself a leader and a STEM advocate. In fact, the third book that I wrote was specifically focused at helping women stay in the academy, or in engineering, excuse me, and the academy. So many women leave their STEM careers. And it's just heartbreaking to me when I see someone leave who I know, maybe even since you were a little girl, you wanted to have this technical career, this engineering career, even medical career. And then of course you get in this place, in this space, and you feel marginalized. And so women are leaving. So that book really was a research-based but practical approach to address that. And I also serve as an expert to the United Nations as it relates to women in STEM. One of the proudest moments of my career happened when I was selected as a Jefferson Science Fellow for the U.S. Department of State. And I've said many times, I have never been more aware of the impact of my engineering knowledge than when in this place. In this organization, I was brought on the team as a fellow, and the Jefferson Science Fellow Program is designed to bring senior scientists into the Department of State and USAID to help understand how to introduce science into the policymaking process for particular areas. And I was asked to look at how to introduce innovation into the HIV and AIDS healthcare service delivery process in developing nations. So, and of course, that's very much an industrial engineering concept. So I actually spent a year with them, traveled to Africa 3 times and to Bangkok at least twice. And so it was really powerful to see how even small changes can impact the lives of tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands. And so I don't ever want us to lose sight on the impact that we are and can have as STEM professionals. And so the HIV and AIDS healthcare service delivery in 2013, this slide's a bit dated, but this is the number of people that were living with HIV and AIDS. And of course, we're expecting the population to really grow. And so as we look at sustainability in this space, how do we use innovation and technology so that we can make sure that millions more people are kept safe, their communities are kept safe and healthy, and they can continue to thrive? Engineering leadership. Engineering leadership research is something that has been very core to my work. I, again, mentioned retaining and advancing women in STEM. That's something that I've actually had a number of National Science Foundation grants for. Also looking at women in the engineering academy. Less than 0.5% of the PhDs in engineering have been awarded to African-American women in this country. And so when we look at that group, it's so funny. When we first started doing this research, the number was so small, we all knew each other. We all had each other's cell phone number. And so but that number has grown over the last 10 years or so. So it really studying that and looking at how can we make changes to positively impact this space. And then leadership is just important to me, period. So understanding leadership and innovation and entrepreneurship, and how do we prepare the next generation of engineers in this space? So that was, I think, the 4th book that I wrote. So these are some of my books. I don't have, there's one that's missing that I just wrote, Engineering for Teens, but I would love to share any of those with you. But more than anything in my time with you, would love to know how I can support you, how I can be a part of your success story, and would love to begin the conversation. So hopefully we will connect. And now the floor is yours. I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you so much for that great introduction.
Sure.
Not sure if we've got questions coming in yet. Come on, everybody. Someone has to have a question.
Amanda Beisel did raise her hand. So Amanda, if you'd like to speak right up, feel free.
Ignore my little kitten there. That was incredible. You have such an amazing past and present. I'm curious as...
Amanda, you went on mute.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. I'm curious on your thoughts as to what's happening with the pandemic and the severity of women leaving the workforce right now. I'm a veterinarian, and it's definitely hitting our profession really hard. And I think a lot of these women are not coming back. And I'm curious as to your opinions on that and how we can help.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for your question. And your kitty is adorable, by the way. But I'm so glad you asked that question. Someone just sent me an article today about that, our HR director actually at NC State Wilson College, because she's gotten 2 resignations from women because the overwhelm is just tremendous trying to manage so much. And I think employers need to aggressively address this, and not just employers, but communities of practice. We need to come together and look at how can we provide solutions, use our joint resources to make sure that we are beginning to address some of the issues that these women are experiencing as a community, because it's pervasive. It's in every area. And so I am very concerned that we don't let this just go by the wayside or be a women's issue. This is a human capital issue. It will impact the economy of our nation if we have all of these women walking away from their careers. And so I think, personally, I would love to see a quick, not because I believe in commissions and committees, but we don't need a committee, just a committee. We need a committee to come up with some solutions. So at the federal level, we're working with industry partners and academia, come together very quickly and look at what are the resources that we can put in place to understand what these challenges are and quickly begin to address them. And we may not be able to address all of them, but establish a plan to roll out a strategy to address some of these issues. And I'm glad you asked me that question, Amanda, because I might send some folks I know that very suggestion.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Did I talk too fast? Did you? You know, I'm from Oklahoma, and we got a lot to say, okay?
I have a question. So being a woman and a person of color, I mean, being a woman, I've seen things get, better in recent years, but, how have you dealt with things in the past where like in your profession, just being like disregarded? That's happened to me, but I'd say more so in my 20s, but, how have you dealt with that? Knowing that they're disregarding you because either your race or your gender.
Oh, excellent question, and thank you for having the courage to ask that. And it has definitely happened, and you're right. It happened more when I was younger than it does now. But just the same, it rarely happens today, but every now and then someone will think they want to try me, but they quickly learn that they don't want to do that. But when I was early career, some of the things that I did was I had mentors. I've been so fortunate to have great mentors throughout my career. And I would talk to them about those situations. So if I had someone who disregarded what I was saying, I had a mentor at my institution, I would talk to her about it, and she would help advocate on my behalf. I've had advocates and sponsors, but you know what? I told them that there was a problem. A lot of times people don't know there's a problem if you don't talk to them about it. So I would talk to them about it. And then I learned to stand up for myself. I would say, no, I'm not through. This is what I was saying. And I think this is why we need to consider what I'm saying. And so I had to learn very early on to take charge of my career. A lot of times, I always say this, when you go to undergrad and graduate school, we're busy planning, or even postdoc, what the next step is, what we're going to do here. But oftentimes when we get in our career, we stop that assertive planning of what our next steps should be and what are the actions we should be taking. So I got very assertive, and I don't know, assertive, I don't want it to sound like a bad word, because it wasn't like I was in people's face, but I almost anticipated it, Carrie. I anticipated when I would go places. With my business, I had a contract with the DOD. So I went to the Pentagon one time with someone who worked in my business. And now keep in mind, I'm the CEO. And the colonel kept talking to him. And he kept saying, you can ask Dr. Mccauley. Dr. Mccauley can answer that. And every time, then the colonel would go back and talk to him. And so, in addition to anticipating it, standing up for myself, what I also learned to do, Carrie? Not to take it personally. It's not personal. Don't own other people's issues. Because I remember it used to frustrate me so much. And I'd say, why don't they respect me as an engineer? But you know what? It really doesn't matter to the degree that we, what's the best way to say this? Because it matters. You need to stand up for yourself, but we can't let it stop us. That's where I'm going. I hope that answered your question, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. And I see we got some other questions here in the chat.
Read them to you here. We've got from Professor Stoddard.
Okay.
How do you think the university STEM culture should shift to address bias and stereotyping on campus so that it is not replicated in the workplace?
Well, that's another really good question. I just sent some resources out. I spoke at Brookhaven National Labs for the International Women's Day, and someone from the lab asked me for resources. There are so many good social science-based projects and studies that show us how to address this. There are a number of ways we need to provide training, anti-bias training. We need to provide, oftentimes in the academic environment and in the corporate world, women don't have as many opportunities for mentors, sponsors, and advocates. So we need to put those folks in that environment, in the academic environment, for our young women. And we also need to make sure that we train and talk to our faculty. And guess what? Train the students. Just because, hopefully you're young and energetic and you're not bringing a whole lot of biases, but we all have biases. We need to make anti-discrimination training a part of every curriculum so that people learn how to truly value each other and truly welcome different people from different backgrounds into an organization. So when you walk out of WPI, not only are you an amazing STEM professional, an amazing engineer, you're also someone who understands how to value everyone and make the most of your team.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
We have
What if
another, oh, sorry.
parents of young women wanting them to go into STEM? First off, I'd like to give you a hug if you have a young woman who wants to go into a STEM career, because we sure do need them. I would say the advice is to connect them with STEM programs that are at the high school, middle school, junior, community college areas. So get them engaged in a STEM community, because as young girls grow older, we know that between middle school and high school is where we lose it as it relates to STEM. So start to create that sense of community around them now, so that it's not unusual for them to want to have a STEM career. And when they start to feel those nudges where people are saying, maybe that's not for you. So start to create that community and that environment for them. That's one thing. And continue to expose them to different areas of STEM. If you can't find a program that they can be in regularly, so not just going once a year, but a program that they can regularly be a part of, and just encourage them. See if you can find maybe a mentor for your child. So I would strongly encourage you to build that community around them. Okay, I see Vonda, you have a question? I see a hand raised, and Renee. Sure.
Yes. So what baby steps or advice do you have for organizations where, such as WPI, at least when I was there, and my own corporation, which we're a corporation, so you can guess what our makeup looks like. We're having a reckoning of trying to figure out one pipeline to get people in, but I'm really more focused about how do we keep people here? How do we build this more inclusive community? What baby steps can we take when we have this pipeline coming in, but they're coming into an environment that doesn't look like them, that doesn't necessarily know what they've been through, or, you come in, my worry always is that people aren't going to come in as their best self, right? And have to code switch. And my key is I don't want people to have to assimilate, right? This is about inclusion, not asking them to change in order to be successful at our company.
Sure. Well, and I have a workshop that I do for organizations because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I mean, it really is, but there are definite things that you can do as an organization and steps that you can take from a leadership standpoint, from I don't want to use the term intervention, but if you have women that you're losing, you do need an intervention. And so I think that there are a number of things that can be done. I mentioned, but first of all, you have to acknowledge that there's a problem. And I mean, I was speaking for one organization and they wanted to talk about advancing women. This is twice they've had me speak for them. And I went to their leadership page. There was not one woman among about 16 leaders. There were about 12 white males, maybe 3 international males, and 1 African-American male. Not one woman among 16 leaders. So there has to be an acknowledgement that there's a problem and that there is a desire to change, and that this change is viewed very seriously, very strategically. Diversity is not a good idea. Diversity is a smart idea. It's a good economic decision. So really understanding why you want to have diversity, not just diversity, inclusion and equity. And so again, it's a long haul, but it is so well worth the investment. I mean, there's an economic case for diversity over and over again. So if you want to connect with me later, Vonda, I'm happy to share some of those resources for you. And as I mentioned, I have a workshop that I do that targets that in organizations.
That'd be great. I mean, I think there's a lot of work being done on the mentorship and sponsorship, but I'm still trying to figure out how to make this interconnectivity, this actual community feeling, especially in our new virtual world. And it's a struggle. It's something that has to be organic to be successful, and you can't just make people do it, right? So I'll definitely reach out to you. Just wanted to.
Absolutely. No, I would love that.
Thank you.
I would love that. Renee?
Hi, so I'm not sure I'm the only one who's ever faced this problem. I don't know if it's more because I'm newer in the kind of career world, but I've been finding that I personally learned, I'm sure many of us did going to WPI, to kind of understand a well-rounded view of problems in your teams and how to collaborate well with others. And I've been finding that when I ask questions, I'm told I'm not confident.
You're not confident?
But that's not necessarily what's going on there. So how would you recommend communicating with others that if you're asking questions, that doesn't necessarily equal.
They told you weren't confident because you asked a question? Renee?
Yeah, I get that all the time, and I'm trying to understand the well-rounded view of the organization and how all the pieces work together so we can be a stronger unit. And I'm just told that all the time. I'm not confident, and if I were asking questions, obviously I'm missing something.
Okay.
But I think I'm asking questions because we're all missing something.
Very good for you. Now, you remember I said I don't own other people's issues? Now, let's just admit, some people in the workplace are hard to deal with. Some of them are downright hateful, and some of them are just crazy. So you asking questions does not mean that you're not confident. This is what I will say to you, because you appear to be young, and maybe you're soft spoken, but I don't want you to not be you, Renee. Okay. I don't want you to not be you. I want you to continue to ask your questions, but do you have a mentor that you can talk to in your organization about what are some of the best ways that you can share your thoughts? Because maybe writing it down, communicating it by email, and then share when you show up, explain why or more detail. But that's so dangerous to me that someone would suggest that because you ask a question, you're not confident. So I think that there are a number of things. One, let's look at finding your mentor, okay? Number two, now I am 57 years old, and so I'm pretty sure and confident about the things I say today. But when I was 27, I may not would have spoken with as much confidence. So I learned to practice the things that I was going to say, okay? And that when I was going to an important meeting, I would practice what I was going to say. And if they asked me a question, why are you asking that? I would explain why it was related and tie it to the vision or the goal associated with the project or the team. And then if there were follow-up questions, I would be enthusiastic, but I would make sure you do not let them turn your question into a confidence crisis. Keep tying it back to the project and to the common goal. But I would say, I think we all want the same thing here. We all want to solve this problem, in the most efficient manner possible. So if that's the case, how do you suggest we do X, Y, or Z? So that's one thing that you can do. And again, I would practice what I was going to say. So feel free to reach out to me, Renee, if you want to chat more about that. Okay. I think we have some more questions. Michelle says,
thank you so much.
Oh, you are so welcome. Don't you let them make you feel bad, Renee. So the next question, the USPTO cited a study concluding if women, minorities, and children from low-income families were to invent at the same rate as white men from high-income families, the rate of innovation in America would quadruple. Yes, did you hear Susan Rice's statement about the $5 trillion impact on the economy if we can get people who have been disenfranchised involved in innovation? So how do we get more women to be innovation or inventors? We need to get more into the pipeline. Let me just tell you, that is what I feel like my life's work is in this season. First I was working to get women to study engineering. Then I was working to get them to go to graduate school. Then I was working to get them to stay in the field. And now I'm like, every time they up the ante, women get left behind. We get left behind. So now there's this huge push and billions and trillions of dollars going into innovation. And the women aren't at the table at the level we need to be. So what I'm doing, I'm working with a number of organizations. Association for Women in Science is one, all to look at how do we use strategies that we know work to engage women in innovation in a manner that is attractive to them. Okay, because all innovators don't want to engage in the same manner. So what does a social science literature, I'm actually working on a proposal for this for the National Science Foundation now for the advanced program. So what does a space that's comfortable for innovation and bringing my ideas in from lab to market, or to even consider that, how do I reach these women? So I think there are definitely things that need to be done. We need to create innovation spaces that are welcoming and engaging and have a, what's the best term to use? Not learning style, but an engagement strategy that would be attractive to women, according to what, and not that women are monolithic, but looking at the social science literature, you know, really considering that. So I'm working on with folks on that right now. And then, you know what? Let's be each other's sister's keeper. Tell other women if they have a great idea. I think you should consider looking at a patent for that. Have you considered possibly a business around that concept? And so let's encourage each other in this space. I'm talking too long because I'm getting behind in questions. Let's see. Does anyone want to address?
Not at all. You take your time.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so Michelle. Okay, so we address that one. Yes, Vonda says, I think sometimes women are judged more by our delivery than the actual content, which is unfortunate. And yes, and it is true. I wasn't, you know, I didn't roll out of engineering school, you know, this assertive and confident. So I don't want you all to think that if you struggle a little bit with your confidence, that that's something you can't overcome. When I tell you, I would practice what I was going to say in meetings. And then let me say this too, and I'm going to go here. As a Black woman, if you get too loud, they call you an angry Black woman. Okay. So, you know, I have to, yes, I have to temper it both ways. I went from people not thinking I knew what I was talking about till I, you know, was winning the engineering competitions in engineering school, to them thinking I was mad. And so really having to walk that fine line. So it's really important for us to understand the environments we're in, get advocates in those spaces, and then be comfortable speaking up. And Jamie says, I was always taught, and I'm thankful for this and pass it along all the time. You should always ask a question, because if you have a question, chances are others have the same question and just aren't asking. Okay, exactly. So it actually takes confidence to ask the question. Thank you, Jamie. Awesome. Yes, I love this. That we are on your team, Renee. You don't worry about asking those questions. Are there other questions? I'm trying to keep up. I'm having a ball with you all. This is fantastic. The professor, Lisa, don't let me go over. I'm sorry, Jamie, go ahead.
So, no, that's all right. There was one question that I think got a little lost in the chat here. And I'm sorry I missed who it was from, but the question is, can you talk more about how you chose the paths you did at different points in your life?
Sure. Well, gosh, I've had a number of crossroads. I started out as pre-med. I wanted to be a doctor because my dad said I was smart and I liked science. And so I started studying pre-med. Well, I quickly learned that I didn't like the sight of blood. And so I probably wasn't going to make the best doctor, but I liked science and math. And so I actually went to the library. I said, so many students, it's funny when I ask a question, how many people here have seen a car catalog? A lot of the young folks have never, okay, we've seen a car catalog. Well, I actually went to the library, climbed up the steps at Felger Hall and looked at the different engineering disciplines because I was chemical engineering pre-med at the time. And when I looked at the different engineering disciplines, I saw industrial engineering had concentration in ergonomics. And so I was like, wow, so I can still use my interest and love for the human body and get an engineering degree, but not have to see blood. And so that's how I chose industrial engineering. And now, how did I end up in academia? Hey, Marnie, I see Marnie there. So how did I end up in academia? I always said I wanted to get my BS in engineering, get an MBA, buy a BMW, and never look back at school. Okay. I had no thought that I would get a PhD until I heard Dr. Howard G. Adams speak at a program. He was the director of GEM, a graduate program at the time. And he stood on the stage and he talked about how fascinating it was to have a PhD in science or engineering and how you could solve real problems and how you could really make a difference in the world. And he said, I think you all ought to get a PhD. And so I was sitting there, I was a young mom. I took my daughter to college with me. And so I had my daughter there at the banquet with me and myself and one of my classmates, Marcy Turner, another African-American female. And we went up to him afterwards. We said, you said we could be get PhDs in engineering. You didn't really mean us, did we? He said, oh, sure you can. He said, I meant you ladies too. And so that was the first time someone actually said it to me. And then, but I had the audacity to believe it. And so then I got a mentor. I had a wonderful professor, Dr. Percival. And I want to say this to our men. Men mentor women. People can mentor you who don't look like you. People who can mentor you who are not your gender. Dr. Percival, I've had white males that were some of my greatest mentors. So now they couldn't tell me where to go get my hair done or how to wear my hair on an event, but they could provide me mentoring in so many ways. So I got a mentor, did undergraduate research, and that was all she wrote. And so that's how I ended up in the academy. And, as far as my career now, I am, feel so blessed to love what I do and still be able to get excited about my research. I'm still very much engaged in research and publishing, working with students. Well, I have a lot of energy. I take a lot of vitamin C. So, it's a lot of work, but I love it. I really do still love it.
It's really excellent. Thanks so much. I know we're running a little behind, but I think this one more question is a really important one and touched on what you were just saying around you can mentor people that don't look like you. So Ellen is asking, addressing some of these concerns and issues requires engaging men in the discussion and solutions, partly due to the fact that they're often in the leadership and decision-making roles. How do you recommend we engage our male colleagues, friends, community members, et cetera, to help?
Well, I think it depends. One of the best ways I think to engage our male colleagues is I'm all about the vision. Why are we all here? Why are we all leaders at WPI? Why are we all working in this organization to be the very best we can be, to produce the best products we can have? So in order to do that, we need first of all, a talent pool that reflects those that we are serving. We also need to have access to the greatest and most successful minds. And that means getting diverse people at the table. So I would make the economic case. I mean, if a lot of people if you don't want to just do the right thing because it's the right thing, but there's a huge, huge economic case for diversity. Also, from a demographic standpoint, the population is changing. So if we want, it's about sustainability. If we want our organizations to be around 25, 50 years from now, it might be a good idea to take this problem very seriously. I think pointing to examples where it has worked. And also, I don't suffer from a lack mentality. Some people who don't want diversity have a lack mentality, and I call it, they see a pie. And so if I cut a slice and let a woman come to the table, then that means that a male has lost out. And that simply isn't true. It's just not true. We have more scientific and technical challenges than we can begin to solve. So we need every solid citizen at the table working side by side to address these challenges. So I think the economic case, I think the social case, Wpi Matters is from a sustainability perspective. And I found that many men who have daughters, as they see their daughters grow up and possibly enter into STEM fields, their perspectives have tended to change. And I've seen some of that in my 30-year engineering career. And that's kind of a long answer.
No, thanks, Pamela. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mccauley, for joining us. We're so thrilled to have you as part of our WPI community. So next, I'm pleased to introduce you to two members of the WPI faculty who are joining us to present their important research findings and solutions on diversity, equity, and inclusion tools for teamwork. Professor Lisa Stoddard is a human environment geographer who is interested in the intersection of nature, society, and justice, particularly in the context of climate change. She looks at the ways in which we can design for climate resilience in terms of infrastructure, location-specific practices, and through community resilience. Her interest and research on social justice, her interest in research on social justice extends into her classrooms, including research on critical and culturally relevant pedagogies, STEM and social justice, and her own efforts to create inclusive spaces and practices for learning. She's received multiple grants to examine issues of bias and stereotyping on undergraduate student project teams and the impact this has on student learning and experience. Lisa is an associate professor at the Global School, Social Science and Policy Studies. She's co-director for the International Development, Environment, and Sustainability, and coordinator of the Environmental and Sustainability Studies Program and director of the Farm Stay Project Center. Professor Jeff Feifer's research focus in philosophy is on contemporary continental philosophy, social and political philosophy, social global justice, and development ethics. He teaches philosophy courses, international studies courses, and for the Great Problem Seminars program. In addition to a number of chapters and edited collections, Professor Feifer's work can be found in journals such as Human Studies, The European Legacy, Crisis and Critique, Continental Thought and Theory, and Current Perspectives in Social Theory. He is co-editor of I missed this one, Feminology, sorry guys, and the Political, and author of The New Materialism. In addition, he is co-editor of Philosophy in the Contemporary World, an international journal, and book reviews editor for Human Studies, a journal for philosophy and social science. Jeff is Associate Professor of Philosophy and International and Global Studies for the Department of Integrative and Global Studies within the Department of Humanities and Arts. Please join me in welcoming Professors Lisa Stoddard and Jeff Feifer.
Thank you so much, all. Really appreciate being here and are so honored by the invitation. And also incredibly honored to be offering some information about our research after hearing from Dr. Mccauley. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to just second that. Very excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And thank you, Dr. Mccauley, for such a great discussion. And following a lot of what we talked about, or was talked about just now, I think we are going to talk about similar things. I'm going to go ahead and start us off, and Lisa and I are going to kind of move back and forth between our discussion, and maybe just really briefly a little background in this project and the work that we've been doing. So both of us teach for the Great Problem Seminars program, which is our first year projects program. And we've been doing it for a number of years. And, as those of you that have been through the program or, know anything about it, it's a program that sort of engages our first year students in WPI's signature project-based learning approach. It works across 2 of our 7-week terms. Students work in teams on sub-problems inside larger, big, knotty problems such as climate change, energy issues, world health, education, right? Those kinds of things. And so for the first 7 weeks or so, students work in mini projects in teams, getting to know the kind of bigger issues. And then the second 7 weeks, they work on a sustained project on a team. And, part of our mission is not only to give them content knowledge, but also to really get them started in, thinking about how to work on teams, how to work well on teams. And maybe 7 years ago, we were looking at some data in the program because we do a summer institute every year with all of the faculty that teach in this program, and realizing that we were seeing an uptick in some students, especially students with historically minoritized identities on our campus, leaving the university after being in our program. And it was a very small uptick, but we were noticing it, and we were sort of interested in kind of thinking about, well, what is the problem? What are we seeing in our classrooms, and how maybe can we start addressing this? And Professor Stoddard and I kind of were talking about kind of things that we had seen happening on teams, just in an anecdotal way. We got a faculty learning community grant to kind of do some investigation on this, and did some more work. Then also ended up, a few years later, getting a Davis Educational Foundation grant, or being a part of a Davis Educational Foundation grant, as we were working on tools, because what we were seeing is that students on our teams were experiencing bias, stereotyping, issues around equity in terms of how work is distributed and all of those sorts of things. And so we began doing some literature reading, doing some experimentation with various tools. And we've produced around 6 tools over the last 7 years or so as a part of this project that we've been testing in our classrooms. And then as a part of the Davis Education Foundation grant, we've been sort of spreading them across our campus, continuing to collect data, continuing to refine and revise them. And we're going to talk tonight just about 3 of them, and we're going to share some of information what the literature tells us. A lot of it is stuff that we were just talking about with Dr. Mccauley, so that's great. So we're sort of primed to kind of think about these things, and then also some data from our own studies. So along with developing these tools, we also have been collecting written reflections from students on our campus about their experiences in teamwork and their experiences around some of these issues. And so a lot of the quotes that we'll show you, well, all of the quotes that we'll show you on these slides are from WPI students talking about their experiences, and they've been de-identified, so they've been anonymized according to our IRB. So that's kind of the broad picture, and so we'll just go ahead and maybe get started. So not surprising to probably most of you that have worked on a team, there are often issues on teams, right? And a lot of those issues stem from team dynamics problems that that occur regularly. This is just some data from a study that was done by Joanna Wolf, who's at Carnegie Mellon in 2016, and a couple of her colleagues, looking at 4 universities that employ project-based approaches to education like us. So WPI was not a part of this study, but they followed around 700 students across the course of a year. And what the study showed was that around 85% of the students experienced some team dynamics issue, at least one, over the course of that year. The most common problems that the study talks about are things like slacker teammates. So you can see 74% of students sort of experienced something, issues with a slacker teammate, maybe somebody not pulling their weight. Issues with domineering teammates, 1 or 2 people trying to take control of the team, not letting other people do work, directing people, those sorts of things. And then 45% experience some limited learning as a result of various types of team dynamics issues. And then so around 30% reported experiencing being excluded from work. And exclusion from work can happen in a whole host of different ways. Sometimes, students on teams maybe live in the same dorm together, 2 of them, and so they do a bunch of work and other team members are left out. Sometimes teams meet at times when one of the students has work study, or if the student has a job, they're unable to make it. Another way this can happen sometimes is that you have a domineering teammate who maybe decides to write the entire lab report or the report for the project or a big portion of it, and thinks they're helping everybody, but then the students that are left out of that don't gain the skills. And so part of what we want to do at WPI and our sort of mission in project-based learning is to teach students, to give students the skills that you can really gain from project-based learning, and really give it to all of our students, so that when they leave the campus, they can talk about having played different roles on teams, they've learned how to work on teams well, all of those sorts of things. But when you have these problems, the learning is limited, right? So we're not getting the skills to everybody when you're seeing these sorts of things. So the other thing that we know from the literature is that students through employers, right, through employer studies. So these are 2 examples of some employer studies that were done recently, asking employers what they value in the graduates from universities, and often these particular sets of studies has teamwork as the top 2 valued skills, or the second top valued skill, and teamwork sits in the top 5 usually. Some years it's higher, some years it's lower. This one is one that was showed it as number 2. So part of our mission at WPI also is to give students skills in working on teams. The Wolf study that we're showing you also broke out some of its findings in terms of some very broad identity categories. And unsurprisingly, again, Dr. Mccauley was speaking to some of this, and we were sort of having this conversation earlier. But this study showed that women and students of color experience these issues, at least one of these issues, at higher rates than their white male counterparts. So here you see white men saying they experienced one of the issues on the last slide 23% of the time, white women 37% of the time, men of color 41% of the time, and then women of color 58% of the time. Also, to say a little bit more about some of these employer studies, They value teamwork, obviously, as for graduates entering the workforce, but they also say that they find that students aren't well prepared to work on teams. And not only are they not well prepared to work on teams, but they have difficulty managing conflict and working with those who are different from them. We also know from the research, and we were actually just talking about this, so Dr. Mccauley was sort of making these points a second ago, that the ability to work with people with different backgrounds is really important. There are studies that show that teams are more innovative and they are better at problem solving when they are diverse, when there are people with different backgrounds and different experiences and different identities working together on issues and problems. We see that the outcomes are better. But if our students are experiencing some of these issues that we saw a minute ago, they're unable to really make use of that difference, of that diversity, in ways that can bring out that innovation, that can do the kind of things that these studies show us. So these are some very broad kind of general issues that this study shows. What we want to do now is show you some more issues that sort of we have found in the work that we've been doing over the last 7 years on our teams, on our campus, and also connecting that up with some of the literature around this area, some more fine-grained team dynamics issues. And then we'll talk a little bit about a few of the tools that we've developed and kind of share with you both some of the benefits, and then if there's time, we'll share some of the limitations. So I will show you the first kind of more fine-grained team dynamics issue that we've been kind of thinking about and working with. And this is an issue that the literature identifies as intellectual marginalization. And so this is when a student's ideas are ignored, not taken seriously, or voices are silenced. And a few minutes ago, we heard some people giving examples of that kind of thing. Here are a couple of examples, or here's an example from a student in our study. So this is Aman. Names are changed. International male student. Aman says, "I've encountered people who were just stunned that I had an education at all. Isn't X place all desert? How can you speak English so well?" Somebody would say to Aman, or somebody said to Aman. "I truly don't know how to move past this type of ignorance. It's simply utterly difficult to give out educated ideas in your team when they are already second guessing how you got to their college in the first place." So this is an example from our study of a student on our campus talking about some intellectual marginalization.
So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of other types of issues our students have faced. The next one is referred to by Meadows et al. As task assignment bias. And this is when students assign themselves or others tasks based on unconscious biases of who is more or less capable or suited for specific tasks. So again, some quotes from our own students. This comes from Tisha, identifies as an African-American female student, names are changed. "I can't help but notice Jack got the more dominant role that requires a lot of extensive research and seems to outdo me and Amber in the tasks we had to do." This comes from someone we're calling Sam, identifies as a first-generation Latino student. He says, "A stereotype that people place on me is being a stereotypical lazy Latino. In previous groups, they'd give me the minimum work to do and were surprised when I spoke up and said I could also cover other parts." Another issue we see is something that Meadows et al. Refer to as lack of work recognition. This is when students' contributions are not acknowledged, when credit for work is stolen, or when individual work is subsumed under the work accredited to the whole group. This comes from Jen, identifies as a white female student. She says, "I've been part of teams where I've been the only female on the team, and I very often was assigned the job of organizing people, to the point of being expected to know people's schedules and remind them of meetings and tasks, as though I was Outlook's calendar app. Sending emails and being expected to take notes at every single team meeting. On top of this, I would have very little opportunity to get hands-on experience with the project. And during the meetings, I would be given very little time to talk, and most of my ideas weren't taken seriously. This was especially frustrating when people would later repeat my suggestions and immediately get the support of the group." Another one we are referring to as extra work for the same recognition. This is when a student has to work more than other team members in order to be seen as contributing the same amount. Ashley identifies African-American female student, says the work we divide tends to have the same degree of work, but it still seems as if I always lag behind them. In order to do something meaningful, I have to do twice the amount of work as them. So just before we jump into some of the tools, these are some things that we saw as faculty members only through student reflections. These were things that we had students working as teams where maybe one person was a little bit more quiet, one person maybe talked a bit more, but there was no, real evidence that this was happening. And as someone who teaches students in teams and, at WPI, where some of our students, some of our programs are degree requiring programs where our students have to do these activities in order to graduate. It started to feel irresponsible to not really teach our students about these issues, to make them aware and make this stuff visible. And also for us to prepare our students to recognize that this is happening and to give them some tools to set up for equitable and effective teamwork from the beginning, with the kind of larger goal of sending out WPI students who won't reproduce this kind of behavior, those who are perpetuating these types of issues, who won't reproduce that again in the classroom.
One last quote before we move to some discussion of the tools is that one of the things that we also recognize and see and have come to know sort of over the years of working on this stuff with our students in our classrooms, having them do some reading around issues of bias and stereotyping on teams, around the kinds of things that we were just talking about, and then having them begin to kind of think about and work with our tools as they're working in teams, is that often the students are not engaging in this behavior in conscious ways, right? That they're not aware it's happening. Both the students who it's happening to and the students who might be doing the sort of engaging in the behavior and that sort of stuff. They're not intentionally trying to do it. And here's sort of an example of a student in our study recognizing this over time as we've been kind of working with them. So this is Josh, he's a white male student, and Josh says, prior to our discussions about communication, I had assumed that Una and Maria wouldn't participate in conversations because they had nothing to say. I was surprised when they told Oliver and I that they felt excluded from our conversations and often had things to say, but don't say them. I felt awful about this because I never meant to exclude anyone. Me and Oliver would just get caught up in our debate over our ideas. And this was actually Lisa's team. And she maybe could share just a brief kind of anecdote about kind of how others on this team felt during their project.
Yeah, so the two women who were calling Una and Maria on this team, they would, after they realized that they really couldn't contribute and their voices weren't being heard and their ideas weren't being recognized, they would spend time while the two guys were talking together about their ideas and the one idea that they felt could possibly be respected and recognized by the two men, so that they would come together and they would insert this one particular idea. And, it really felt to me really detrimental to their education, to having to be spending their time coming up with something that they hope they might get heard or have some respect for. And one thing that I felt quite badly about on my end was that, after reading through these, I realized that I had been calling this particular team, referring to them by the dominant group member's name. So the person who kind of spoke the most and was most dominant, right? And so let's say that person is Oliver. And I'd say, hey, Oliver's team, come on over here, right? And so then I'm kind of reinforcing that situation where Oliver is seen as the lead and being kind of propped up. And so again, kind of having this information and being able to reflect as a faculty member, which is why often we share these kinds of reflections both with our faculty as well as with our students to make this issue more visible.
So we're seeing all this stuff happening on our teams, and we're starting to collect some of these reflections and really think kind of carefully about, well, what do we do? How do we begin to think about both, giving our students tools to recognize when this stuff is happening and recognize it as a problem, and then also correct it, and not just at an individual level, but sort of at a cultural level, at a structural level. And so we, did some sort of reading and thinking, and we started to run across a whole body of literature in asset-based pedagogies. And so this is just one example of one researcher who's very famous that does a lot of work in this area. Gloria, Latson, Billings is now emeritus at University of Michigan. She was a teacher educator in their teacher training program, very prolific author in this area. And she really, worked with teachers working in under-resourced schools and under-resourced neighborhoods, and was seeing that the way that her students and her teachers' students were being approached by the education systems was as sort of students that were lacking things that were, and so this is called a kind of deficit-based model, right? So going into these schools, seeing these students that are under-resourced, and saying they're lacking things, we need to fix that. And she and her teachers being in these classrooms every day, talking to her teachers and her teacher training programs, her teachers, and she would say things like, well, our students in these classrooms, they bring so much and they have so many great experiences. And how do we take their experiences and their expertise, because they have expertise from their sort of lives and their communities, and use those in ways to help them think about or help us think about our education mission. And so she really wanted to shift to a more asset-based approach. And so we started thinking about how asset-based approaches might function in our context. And now we're not doing exactly the same thing that Latson, Billings, and others are. But the idea is to get students to think about what they bring into our classrooms, what they bring to their project teams, make that stuff visible. And as this last bullet point says, sort of create counter narratives that sort of push back on some of these larger cultural stereotypes and biases that are functioning in ways that are disempowering certain members of our teams, and started to make this stuff visible. And so we started thinking about, what does it look like to think about asset-based approaches? What does it look like to have our students do this? And we landed on the strategy of so this is one of our tools that we're going to talk about, having our students create asset maps. And you can see here, this is an example of a real asset map from one of the students in one of our classes. And what we ask the students to do before they get a project, or before they get involved in their project, before they get on a team, really the first day in our classrooms in the Great Problem seminars, is we ask them to sit down and fill out one of these maps. And we sort of put them at the center, and then you can see this sort of first outer ring from Gabriel's center space there. We give them that. So things like team and project skills, what they do for creative expression, related coursework and jobs, relevant experiences, passions and interests, what kinds of technical expertise they might be bringing into the classroom, what kinds of clubs and organizations they're a part of, their personal background and their culture. And we ask them to think about what in all these areas could they put onto this map that they have skills in, that they have experience with. Then after they've filled all of this out, when they first get into a project team, they share those maps with one another. And not only do we do that, but we also ask them to think about 3 areas that they maybe see themselves as not having enough skill in, or enough experience or expertise in, and areas that they want to work on through the course of the project. And so they also share this with their team members. And this is just a way it functions in a lot of different ways, and we'll show you some of the benefits of doing this in a minute, but it's a way to get them to kind of visibilize for others their backgrounds and their experience, so that when they're thinking about how to divvy up work on teams and work together, they have this map to share with one another. So this is the first tool that we use.
Once our students have shared their maps with one another, we give them a team asset chart. And what we do is, you can see on the left-hand column, these are some project tasks that we as their faculty members or their project mentors have identified, right? So in this particular project, the students are going to be reviewing literature on rainwater catchment and filtration. They're going to be creating a design matrix to evaluate potential systems for rainwater catchment and filtration. They're going to be doing digital or hand sketches of potential systems. They're going to be developing asset maps of the community's strengths, so the communities in which they're working in. They're going to create a multi-stakeholder presentation, right? And the project tasks go on and on. Now, being able to divide up a large project into multiple tasks is a skill in and of itself. So we do that for our students here because that's not the skill that we're working on. What we want them to do is to think about how might they divide up work and collaborate together, drawing on the students' assets as well as the areas that they're hoping to grow in. So once they see the different project tasks, then we ask them to fill out their names in the middle column. So their students' names and associated assets, as well as in the last column, student names and areas for growth. And you might see students where they have, you know, 2 names in one column and 2 names in another, 1 name in one column and 3 names in another. And really what we're hoping to do is to have, let's say, that Jeff, for example, is really great at digital or hand sketches of potential systems. So Jeff puts his name in that particular category. And that's something that I really want to grow in. So Jeff and I are going to kind of take the lead on that. The rest of our teams are still going to participate, team members, but we're going to kind of collaborate to take the lead on that particular area. Also, midway through the project, so we have a total of 9 tools, and we'll show you where the handbook that will go into each of those in detail, but so we're going to highlight 3. The processing sheet, can you go ahead and click, Jeff?
Yep.
Great. So it's an assessment tool that we have our students use midway through the project. We usually use it in a project that's at least kind of 3-ish or 4 weeks in length. And it helps teams kind of evaluate how they're making decisions, how they're dividing work and interacting in meetings. It offers them to take an opportunity to make some adjustments to improve on problem areas. Jeff, can you click on that link?
Yeah.
And we'll all cross our fingers that it opens okay. We can still see.
It's not gonna work. Here. Sorry, y'all.
So these questions, we did like a draft, and then we had various iterations developed by some of our IQP teams. So in this, we give this sheet to the teams. You can see here that various people take turns facilitating the questions. You know, so they ask questions like, who talked the most on your team? Who talks the least in your team? Why might that be a problem? How might that impact the productivity of the team? How might that impact feelings of inclusion or equity? Team leadership, who takes the lead the most, who takes the lead the least? Team equity and around decisions, who makes decisions most often, who makes decisions least often? Team commitment, who regularly comes to meetings, who makes space in their schedule to ensure that other members on the team can come to the meetings? Productivity, do team members tend to do the majority of the work on draft and assignments? Do some members tend to do less work? Are assets being used? Are people having opportunities to grow? One of the things that we found that our students really like about this is there's a quantitative answer to some of these. There's numbers, there's yeses and nos. They told us that if we ask them like, how's communication going? They're gonna say, fine. So this allowed them to kind of see and evaluate what's going on and to kind of bring that out into the open and to have some conversations about it. So now we're going to talk with you about some of the benefits that we've seen. And as we said, we will talk to you about some of the challenges as well. And we want to leave some time for questions. So from our research, we've seen that the asset mapping process and dividing up work based on assets and areas for growth can really help to build student confidence. So this comes from Martin, who identifies as a Native American, first-generation student. Martin says, the asset map shows me what I'm capable of. I plan on editing my asset map again because I'm going to need it to remind myself of what I'm good at. I feel that my asset map should be pages long by the time I'm 40. I will continue to utilize my asset map to help me in the future. This comes from Ella, who identifies as a white female student. She says, through creating this asset map, I surprised myself with what I may be able to offer in a team project. Specifically, in this course focused on challenges of developing livable cities, I often feel intimidated by the intelligence of the people around me, as I believe I may not have as much to offer with experience or general knowledge. I may not be the smartest, and I'm not a great writer, but what I lack in these areas, I make up for in creativity, and I have many interests that directly correspond with this course.
So just a couple more benefits, and we'll go through them quickly so there's time for discussion. One of the other things that we see is that students get to know each other and begin to overcome some of their stereotypes. Of course, this is only the beginning of a process, and we see this as something that should be done over and over again, and conversations about these kinds of things, but it's one way to begin this. And this is Kyle, white male student, talking a bit about this particular benefit. He says, I think stereotyping had some effect on what we all initially thought of each other. I saw James as a nerdy kid and Miles being completely introverted. Everyone on the team saw me as a jock type of personality that only came to college to party. The group was able to move past these unspoken stereotypes. Working on this team is different because everyone has a unique skill set and they each approach the problem at hand differently. This has allowed me to learn an enormous amount about myself. I now better understand the parts of myself I have to work on when placed in a team so that it functions most successfully. It's also given me a new experience on how everyone else approaches work. And just one thing to note quickly here, and we see this a lot actually in these reflections, Kyle says, working on this team is different because everyone has a unique skill set and they each approach the problem at hand differently. Now that's always true, right? When you're working on a team, everybody always comes with different experiences and different backgrounds and different skill sets. But the asset mapping work that we've done and that sort of stuff really gives us the opportunity to visualize it, so students see it and they'll be able to sort of recognize it. One of the other things that we see as a benefit from this is that the charting and the asset mapping gives students a procedure to divide tasks based on skill and interest, and it minimizes the kinds of bias, the task assignment bias that we were talking about earlier. So here, this is Stephanie from our study. Stephanie says, as an example of this, we try to use our different strengths to our advantage and build on our weaknesses as well. One example is during the interviews. We knew that Josh was the best person for the job, but we all got to lead at least one of the interviews so that we could gain experience. And just to note here, right, this is students, recognizing in those 3 areas for growth on the asset maps that they can make space for one another to gain those skills that they didn't have before. So they have conversations about how to help each other do that. And this is Stephanie sort of showing that happens. So then she also says, I also have a lot of experience in technical writing. I wrote up a 70+ page portfolio for my engineering project last year. Therefore, I will be leading this aspect of the project. However, there will also be times when Josh and Rita get to lead in this area as well. We all want to make sure that our strengths are used appropriately and that we also get experience in other areas that we might not have had before. And then the processing sheet, in addition to some of these other things, provides a tool to document, analyze, and measure inequity in team dynamics. So this is Nora. Nora says, because of the stereotype that women are better suited for secretarial type roles, considered more feminine, they are often assigned roles that focus on organization. Reflecting on my own experience, this was very accurate for my own group. While John and Arjun focused heavily on finding new technologies, Katie and I conducted other research that was still important, but not as focused on specific technologies. Strategies that my team could use to make the team dynamic more effective is switching up team roles that we do every now and then. That way, Katie and I get more experience with technologies and John and Arjun get more experience with organizing. Also, I think it would be beneficial for each of us to reflect on our own biases that we each have and think about how that is affecting the group. Another example, this is Kay, a white female student. She says, I always left group meetings not trusting my peers could accomplish the quantity or quality of work that they had promised. I often felt like I was on an island. I see that my bias of associating personality type with work ethic impeded our group productivity. So during the workshop, so we workshop these tools with the students. We show them a lot of the quotes that you all are seeing here. They do a bunch of reading, right? So she's talking a bit about going through that. I learned that both Mark and Stacy take a back seat, not out of disinterest, but more so to appease the loudest group member, me. I'm excited about group work, and I feel less pressure about turning in assignments on time, and more so turning in a quality assignment where I can actually learn something. So here's this is a second example here.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, we do have a couple of slides where we talk about some of the limitations that we've seen and some of kind of the next steps for our research. And we also have some links to a handbook that we have created. And for those of you who have access to Canvas, a little bit more of a user-friendly version that you can utilize, and we're happy to give you a course copy. So I'll leave it up to Maureen. Would you like us to discuss some of the limitations, or do you want to open up for questions and we can see if we get there?
Well, I think we have several questions in the queue and some that we received in advance. So why don't we see what comes of that?
Sounds great.
Sounds great.
So we're going to move into questions. You can put them in the chat. I think Jamie has some queued up that we had already received.
Yeah, we can mix these in. I have 6 questions we got ahead of time. So let's start one here. Then maybe if anybody wants to raise their hand, or we can grab them from the chat and we'll work them all in though. The first question was, I would love to know if the tools are available to the public. I am very interested in this topic and specifically in diversity and innovation. I'm on several committees looking at this issue and working to raise awareness. So I will note, I did put the link a couple of times to your handbook in the chat, but if Lisa or Jeff, you want to add to that?
No, so yeah, we have a freely available handbook up on WPI's digital commons. There are 2 versions, and I think you have the link for the newest version. The other thing is we are working on a book manuscript for a published book that'll look like a handbook that will have those tools in it, and then more discussion of some of our findings and other things. So.
Oh, I think the link didn't go through. I'll make sure that I put the 2020 version in there just in case. That's its title. It looks like the link didn't copy over, but I'll put it in there.
Yeah, and Jamie actually already has it available because I just opened it and it is the 2020. So you guys can.
Great. Perfect.
Great.
Thanks.
And like I said, anyone who has Canvas, if you email us, we do, instead of inviting someone as like a student or teacher, we do a course copy, and then that way you can manipulate the tools in whatever way you want without, disrupting them for everybody else who's looking at it. So you can import them into your courses or print them out or whatever it is that you'd like.
I just want to also, I was looking at some of the questions in the chat, and not to go out of order, but Natalie mentions that we haven't really talked about neurodiversity, and that is actually true, and it's one of the areas that we see a limitation and that we've been thinking a little bit about. And we do actually have our students in the handbook, you'll see we have our students do some reading around neurodiversity and how that works on teams and kinds of things that we need to think about, but it's an area that we know we need to do more work in. So.
One thing to note about our data is the reason we chose to look at international students, students of color, and then students identifying as male and female is because those are things that are often reported on applications as students come in. So thinking about members of the LGBTQIA+ community, like that's not something that, folks are putting down on applications, and same thing with neurodiversity. And other categories. So that has influenced the ways in the categories in which we're looking at identity categories. How should we handle questions? Do you want us to pull them from the chat, or Jamie, will you just relay questions to us?
Well, we could do a little bit of both, because I've got 6 pre here, so I'm going to go back to one of our pre-questions since we just hit a chat question. But I'll also, if somebody wants to verbally ask a question, please just use the raise hand feature and we'll grab you. So the second question we had was, how can we bring people along with us in supporting DE&I who are not supportive? For example, family members, friends, neighbors, workplace colleagues across many generations.
I mean, I think, you know, at least for me, I think there's a couple of different strategies that I feel like I take. One, I think we've found both with our students who are reluctant, that we saw in some of our first years of doing this work, students would say like, oh, here we go, we're gonna do white male bashing. And when we would show them quotes from their peers, and they would recognize that, like, you know, just like I told you all, like there are things that I did as a teacher that I realized I shouldn't be doing, and I still learn that stuff, right? So I think making some of that visible goes away from seeing it as statistics and numbers, as like, these are the experiences of my peers, right? So a lot of times our students will say like, oh, I really hope I'm not doing that, but now I'm gonna make sure of these 10 things. I'm gonna speak last, so I think that can help. And then also, I think sharing your own experiences of things that you've done or that you've learned and that you're still learning. And so that perhaps people don't feel like they're being demonized or being seen as bad people. And to just, you know, be willing to have some of those kind of challenging conversations and personalize them in ways that people can relate to.
Can I just add quickly to that too? We had similar reservations from some faculty colleagues as we started to do this work and present it around. And that quote that we shared earlier, and you probably don't remember, from Kyle, talking a bit about, you know, the sort of recognition of, you know, the biases and stereotyping that he was placing on some of his friends, the jock type and the introvert and the nerd, like showing those kinds of things to those skeptical colleagues or coworkers or whatever as a way to show them that this works for everybody, right? It's like really useful for everybody, has been pretty effective for us at bringing people along as well. So.
I think you're muted, Jamie.
Yeah, I thought I had unmuted myself. Happens once a meeting, right? Sorry, I was scrolling through the chat. I saw a couple of questions. I want to grab them out of the chat here, but now I've lost them. So Jane Scott is asking if there's support for neurodiversity now, other than what you guys are doing. I'm assuming on WPI's campus.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there's the Office of Disability Services. Students register. They don't have to, but they can register, and then you know, faculty are given just very general heads up that, you know, the student has special accommodations. And I actually, you know, one thing I didn't used to do when I got those, because they don't really share a ton of information with you. It's just like, if there are tests, sometimes people get extra time, like that sort of stuff. But I've found over the course of the last even few years, reaching back out, so having a conversation with the student and then also reaching back out to the folks at ODS, I do that regularly now, and I learn more about my students and learn more about how to help them, because I can have conversations, and they don't, you know, there are laws about what they can share and what they can't share, but you can have conversations about, you know, other needs. And so I will do that, and you know, I encourage my faculty colleagues to do that all the time as well. So yeah, accessibility services, yes, thank you, Sue. Apologies.
Amy Curran is a somewhat new director in accessibility services, and Amy pre-pandemic gave a workshop on project advising with neurodiverse students and how to kind of support the team, support the student, and to kind of better understand some of the dynamics that's happening and effective strategies of how to navigate through those challenges and how to talk to all the students on the team. And I found that to be really helpful. And I know that Amy is planning to do that more frequently as well.
I have a question. I was an engineer and I stayed home with the kids because my son had lots of surgeries. So I became a school teacher. So there were the IUPs and the 504s. And my nephew goes to University of Massachusetts and he has those services, but it's up to him if he wants to use them. And he's gotten more independent because of it. See, when I was at WPI, if I needed help with anything, there was very little there. And what surprised me, when my son was looking at colleges, I wanted to go to Yale. I wanted to go to different colleges and see what they were like, even though my kids went to WPI. But like at Yale, they said everybody gets 99 and up. I'm like, what? There was help in science and math and English, you name it, you could come for help. And when my kids were going to school, I was surprised WPI started doing that. That didn't exist way back when. So we've come a long way.
Great.
Yeah, so thank you.
Okay, one of our pre-questions here, how can we increase retention for experienced women in STEM positions?
So, I think this speaks to one of the things that Jeff and I had kind of hoped as a really broad long-term goal of what we've been working on is that by talking about this stuff explicitly, I gave this workshop in a couple of grad courses and our grad students said, why is this the first time this is being talked about? Like, I'm finishing up my PhD. These issues have been plaguing me for my entire time here. And now all of a sudden, like, we're bringing this up in one workshop. And I think those students felt, I had a student driving an Uber, another graduate student who said, you gave that workshop and that was the most significant part of my PhD education, right? And I think, having that made visible, validates the experiences that people have, but also for those who are in, have the privilege of not having those experiences, of seeing how that plays out can be really, can bring a lot of awareness, but it can't be one training. It can't be one, instance. This is something that Jeff and I have worked to try to embed in the project experience. So it's not like you get a workshop and then you're done. A lot of the other 9 tools are really other pieces embedded within the project where this is reinforced again and again as a kind of a new culture of teaming. With the hope, and we talk about this with our students, we show them some of the data that Dr. Mccauley talked about of, women leaving STEM at higher rates, folks in the queer community leaving STEM at higher rates, people of color, leaving STEM at higher rates. And we tell them, like, you have this culture, it's recreated in the workplace and reinforced in the workplace, and you have the ability to change that, right? So we try to empower them in that way. And I think that if we can embrace that more largely as a STEM and STEAM community and as a WPI community, I think it's our hope that can really help to make a culture shift.
Yeah, and really thinking about it as a structural problem, not an individual problem, right? So, not only equipping students, like we said earlier, not only equipping students with tools who are experiencing are on the receiving end of some of these bad team dynamics, right? But also everyone, so that everyone is aware of these things. And so, yeah.
So I'm going to combine, I think you touched on a question Sue had in the chat, which was whether this was being implemented on most project teams or only in the GPS program. But I'd like to combine that with Janelle's question down here, kind of. My question, expanding on Sue's, would be, is there a plan to kind of incorporate this more university-wide? And then Janelle would follow on with that with how might similar methods start to be used in workplaces where the roles have kind of already been set in stone and people are more resistant to change?
Yeah.
A three-parter for you.
Good. Maybe I'll start and Lisa jump in whenever you feel like it. So the Davis Foundation grant that we got, or that we're a part of, allowed us to, over the last 3 years, recruit faculty across the university. So we've been doing between 12 and 15 other classes a year outside of, and some of those are GPS courses, some of those are IQPs, some of those are in the technical fields where faculty are working with students on teams and using our tools, and then we're scraping data from them, reflections, and seeing how they're functioning in those environments, and then kind of doing some transforming of those. So we are spreading it across the university as much as we can. Also, the university just instituted a center called the Sweet Center, which is a center for helping students and faculty, training them, giving them some training to help facilitate equitable and effective team dynamics. And we just taught our first class to the first set of faculty fellows in B term with some other folks, Elizabeth Long-Lingo and some others. So our work was a part of that, and that I know is going to move forward as well. And then I'll just say one other thing about the question about the workplace. So how much was it, 2 years ago, I think, we gave a talk on this work at Hub Week in Boston at the WPI Seaport space for professionals. And it was interesting. I mean, working with these tools in an education environment, our goals are really to teach our students the skills to work together on teams. And we're, of course, interested in how effectively they work and their work products and those kinds of things, but we're much more interested in the education aspect of this. And we had both some positive and some negative feedback from that. So there were some folks that came to the presentation that really loved the tools, but also said, but also my company cares about the product more than they care about how it gets done, right? So I think that there are sometimes mismatches between what industry thinks about, how industry thinks about teamwork and what's important, and how maybe we're thinking about it. I don't know, Lisa, do you want to add, elaborate?
No, I mean, I think that covers it. At this point, we're in almost 100% implementation in GPS, probably a good 50% in IQP and growing, and plans to continue growing. We are really excited to see the support of the Sweet Center. So it stands for Supporting WPI and Equitable and Effective Teamwork. And looking at ways in which, as Dr. Mccauley talked about, the real important role of mentorship, of could we extend the support that we're trying to provide for students beyond into students' careers through the Sweet Center, to provide mentorship, to provide a space to ask questions or things along those lines. And then beyond WPI, we've given talks other places, but I try to keep a tally of the various different people we talk to who reach out to us for resources. And I think we've advised, over 50 colleagues from across the globe on different things, and had a full implementation of our materials at 3 different universities. So, we're hopeful, but at the same time, it's like we're far from experts, and this work is far from being completed. And we see it as kind of a living work that we learn and see limitations all the time. People brought up limitations here, and that always helps us to keep trying to grow and learn and expand, and also to see what other people are doing with it. Rita Rao is using the asset map to help her PhD students to be able to think about their progress and to set goals, and to be able to really target areas that they want to grow in, to partner with other people. And so, when we're able to learn from other folks about how they're utilizing it, it helps us to see what else is possible and how we might continue to build and grow on those tools.
I think we are going to take one last question, and I'm going to pull it here from the chat because I think this might be a nice place to end. And the question is from Elizabeth Zaletto, and I apologize if I botched the last name. What does your research and/or experience tell you as to what the cause of lack of knowledge or experience is working together?
Can you read that one more time?
Let me read it how she wrote it. I was trying to, it didn't make sense to me as she wrote it, so I was trying to clean it up, but maybe I made it worse. I apologize. So she wrote, what does your research or experience tell you as to the cause of lack of knowledge or experience working together? So I think she's looking, based on your research and experience, can you point to what the actual cause or why we don't understand each other and why we don't have the knowledge when we're working together?
I mean, I think one of the
she's still on here.
One of the things that you know we think about a lot when we think about this is that, especially, you know, WPI has got a 40-year history of doing project-based learning work, having students work in projects, and there's been some, you know, various attempts to think about how to help students figure out how to work on teams. But I think for a long time, the ethos was you work together and you're thrown in the deep end and you sink or swim, and that's how you learn. And I think we just have started to realize that that doesn't work, that you need to, students come to our campus and they don't know how to work on teams and you need to help them. And so part of the project experience really is to think very carefully about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one other thing that Dr. Mccauley brought up is that, you know, every single one of us comes to the table with implicit biases, right? And so we make assumptions about other people. We have our own insecurities. I've had so many students coming from international backgrounds that were like, I am coming, you know, from a place where I was the absolute top person. I was sent to this, you know, American university as this huge privilege and opportunity because, you know, I was seen in this high esteem. And now I come to this space, you know, I may be a person of color and now I'm experiencing racism in an entirely different context. I realize that there's certain, you know, cultural aspects that I don't understand. There are certain, you know, kind of American traditions that I didn't participate in. And now I'm dealing with a lack of confidence. Now I'm kind of pulling back because I'm worried about saying the wrong thing. And now I've been identified as a slacker. So I'm getting a worse grade and my peers are grading me poorly. So much of this happens, you know, within a student's own head and experience. And, you know, we're really grateful that they are often willing to share these in reflections. And our hope again is that by, you know, de-identifying them and making them more visible, that we can start to understand each other a bit better and to see that, you know, I've had some of those experiences, doubting myself or feeling like I didn't fit. And now I know that I'm not alone in that. And hopefully that can make us more empathetic and relate and support one another. So yeah.
Thank you so much for coming this evening and providing us with these actionable steps and information we can bring to our workplaces, homes, and classrooms. We really appreciate everyone being here, all of our presenters and guests, and sticking around a little later, but I think the conversation was worth it. We'd like to close by mentioning a few of WPI's diversity, equity, inclusion efforts and ways for us all to stay engaged with the university. Over the past several years, WPI has been on a mission to infuse diversity, equity, inclusion into every aspect of the university experience, inside and outside of the classroom. We've developed standards and set expectations for campus environment that is accepting and welcoming to all. This work is now being recognized on the national level, and WPI was recently named a recipient of the 2020 Higher Education Excellence in Diversity HEED Award, which honors United States colleges and universities that demonstrate an outstanding commitment to diversity and inclusion. It was awarded by Insight into Diversity magazine, the oldest and largest diversity-focused publication in higher education. WPI is committed to creating an equitable, inclusive, and anti-oppressive community where all are valued and respected as intrinsic members of the community. As part of our work to develop a campus culture that rejects bias, prejudice, discrimination, and hateful acts, WPI has established a bias response program. We encourage everyone who wants to keep an eye on WPI's DEI initiatives and programming to sign up for the monthly newsletter, as well as to follow them on Twitter. And I think those links are going into the chat shortly, if not already. As an alum, staying involved with WPI is important for you, your career, and for the university. No matter what stage of your career, there are volunteer opportunities for all of us from near and far. To learn more about becoming a Crimson Crew volunteer, there will be a link in the chat feed. Another way to connect with fellow alumni and view upcoming events is on the WPI Tech Connect platform. The Alumni of Color Association is offering a series of interactive professional and personal development workshops on careers and happiness. Join them beginning March 24th at 6:30 p.m. for a session focusing on the 4 tendencies, a framework helping to discern your response to expectations and what you can do to empower yourself within your tendencies to advance your goals. That link will also be in the chat, and it's on social media platforms. And I think I saw it on the bridge. There are a number of places. You can always email one of us too if you need a link to something. Save the date, April 29th, for Ask Me Anything, featuring WPI's recently appointed Dean of the Robert Foisy School of Business and alumna, Reverend Dr. Deborah Jackson. WPI Alumni Association is accepting nominations for potential board members until March 14th. If there are alumni you believe may be good candidates for the board of directors, alumni, faculty, and staff can submit nominations, and the form can be found in the chat feed as well. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Happy Women's History Month, and thanks for celebrating with the women of WPI. You can engage with us on social media and stay tuned for future Women of WPI events, which, we're biased, but Women of WPI is another great way to stay involved. So thanks again, everybody.
I have a comment. I just thought I'd say, since I went there in '74, how much easier WPI is. We had a sufficiency that you had to do in the English arts department, and I did mine on Greek mythology. Then you had to do an independent qualifying exam, which I did through the consortium at Holy Cross with the juvenile court system. I was also a juvenile probation officer, and as well as you had to do a major qualifying project, and then you had a competency exam. And I didn't realize until my alumni group that gathered together 2 years ago that it was based on departments. So in mechanical engineering, you had 48 hours to solve this project. You could get signatures that helped you, and then you would defend your project, but they could ask you anything. And we had no set curriculum. And then I felt bad for the chemical engineers because they had a week to do it. But I didn't know it was a constant week. They didn't have to present anything. They could just turn the paper in. So over the years, WPI has changed. And I have to say, I don't want to say the standards are different, but they've been better dealing with everybody, like everything we're talking about tonight. And I thank the presenters very much.
Thanks. So thanks again, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Bye.